Welcome to the Renaissance Sermon. I am your host and mystic. My name's Sleepy. We're going to open this up with a little prayer. If you're new to this, you can just join along. So, what I want you guys to do is close your eyes. And what I want you to do is breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth, and I want you to do this slowly. 5-second count should be good. Alright, so in through your nose, out through your mouth. Okay, good. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Okay, so I want you to let go of all anxiety that you may be holding on to. Alright, any troubles of the week, any type of responsibilities you may have, you can just kind of let it fall to the wind, any credit card debt or any type of financial obligations you may hold. That's right. Breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth. Good. And like I said, any anxiety, and I'm not sure if I mentioned this, any credit card debt, financial obligations as well, just let it all go. And so now that we're free and clear, I want you guys to picture some kind of deity or God that you of your choice. And what I want you to do is, and I also welcome you to, if you have demons, you know we don't judge here. Just picture this entity, and what I want you to do is I want you to imagine just how much this entity is worth to you. Good. Now, this next part you may have to open your eyes for, and what I want you to do is I want you to click on the description. I want you to open the coffee link, and whatever that entity may be worth to you, I want you to donate that to the coffee link description. Now that we got the prayer out the way and some of the more important matters, we're going to start off this episode with talking about really the astrology, right? So, in terms of what's happening, I think we just had, I believe it was June 25th, 2025, right? So that was just a new moon in Cancer conjunct with Jupiter. And that right there, we're not going to go over the actual details. Of course, if you're a Cancer, this may have extra relevance for you, or just have relevance in general for you, but also, like, if you just start to dig in and know astrology a bit more, you'll see how that particularly may have relevance to you, and in many cases it could have more relevance to you. Now, this right here, it's kind of a reprieve in terms of not having so many different aspects to really dig into, so I want to zoom out a bit, and this zooming out is really revolving around a few things that you guys I really hope you guys look into at some point, right? One is Pluto in Aquarius. 2 is Uranus in Gemini. That's about to happen. That hasn't happened yet, but it's about to happen. And also Neptune in Aries with Saturn. So that's kind of a Neptune in Aries is the more long-lasting transit, but Saturn is also, it's going to be there for like about the next 2.5 years. It dips back and forth in terms of between two different signs, but it'll be in Aries for the next 2.5 years. And this is, like I said, you look up the interpretations. I welcome you guys to check that out. This right here, another disclaimer is I am of a particular study of astrology that I call zodiacal alchemy. Other channels, everything that you hear from them is not going to be the exact same, so don't expect it to be. But you should really understand today. I'd really prioritize this understanding in terms of if you hear anything contradictory to this. But the idea is that you guys should understand that conforming to a sick society is not the way you should be doing things. Especially now, especially today. The weather is insane with these 3 different aspects. These are very slow-moving planets in astrology, and Pluto's still a planet in astrology for any of you like Redditors out there. But the idea is, I'm not. The way things are, the way things have been, don't expect things to always be that way, right? Things have always been this way is no longer going to be an acceptable excuse. And the world is essentially going to transform, and I want you guys to be in a place to where you're going to be a part and take part into this transformation. And this is not Sleepy saying, hey, quit your job without a practical plan to survive. This is more so just an understanding that, hey, understand that you may need to baby step toward a new way of living, a new lifestyle in general, that helps you take part in the change that needs to occur, right? Because we can't continue passing on this, right? This is by many accounts just a Ponzi scheme, basically, that we're passing on further and further down the line, you know, and we can't do that. We're seeing the end of this particular scam that we've got going on. In terms of these particular slow-moving planets, what's really special about this is that all of them are moving within 1 year, right? So Pluto takes about at the very fastest it moves to a sign is 7 years, I think, and then the slowest, I think, is 20 years or something like that. Neptune, I think it's 14 years, maybe 12 years, I think it's going to spin in Aries. I don't know, but we'll see. But these planets don't move often. That's the point, right? So don't quote me on those particular numbers, but in Uranus also, I think the average for Uranus is also 7 years. But all of these planets are moving within a 1 year time span. They're going into the different signs within 1 year. And that is, we can expect some shakeups, some very serious shakeups. And I really want you guys to really not be caught on your heels with the idea of change being on the horizon. Our first report is really on a series that is really dedicated to war crimes, right? This particular article or segment in general is by Vivian, right? And this is an article that I'm going to put this link into the description, okay? But I want you guys to really remember something and understand something. Sleepy, you can repeat this actually. Sleepy is the purveyor of truth, the one and only truth, okay? So you guys, I think all this, plug-in articles in the description, I want you guys to understand that you can look at these articles, but I don't want you going off and trying to get some kind of fancy self-education going on, or that this is it, okay? You guys just take a look and then come back here, okay? Now, hopefully, all of you meatbags are listening to me, right? I will purvey the one and only truth about this segment, okay? But the article link is in the description, okay? Now, one direct quote is 122 million people have been forcibly displaced, according to the UN Refugee Agency. And this is as of June 2024. Now, what's crazy about this is more than the recorded estimate for the end of 2023. So, this idea of forcible displacement is actually on a pretty significant rise, right? And in regard to forced deportations in general, we got major conflicts that include Gaza, the Congo, and Sudan, right? And in case you are wondering, this idea of forcible displacement, it's an international crime, right? And that international crime, it does yield to particular exceptions that are supposed to be really very special considerations, right? And those are one is the security of the populace, and the other is the imperative military reasons, right? And with the security of the populace, we're talking about, like, this is when the population of, or the populace of the parties being moved is not one of the parties in the actual conflict, right? So if there's a conflict taking place and you're forcing the other party out, that does not fall under this exception. And also the idea of imperative military reasons, this is really limited to lawful, quote-unquote, military goals, right? And these options are both provided really when the definition for evacuation is satisfied as it's defined by the international humanitarian law, right? And here Vivian gives 3 particular examples at the end of this article, right? In terms of the article itself, I think it really does highlight, like, quite a few things about the actual the idea of this being a war crime, and really describing the problem with this particular instance, or problem with this particular sect of war crimes in general. These 3 particular examples at the end of the article, I think, gives a more, more direct and, understanding in terms of actual case study, right? So one is involving our friend of the show, Vladimir Putin, and he's wanted due to a really just violation regarding particularly the kids in Ukraine who were moved into Russia. I don't think anybody's surprised to see that Vladimir Putin has a warrant out for his arrest, but that was something that I didn't quite hear about, but that's definitely something that is apparently, I mean, if you're trying to influence a population of people and you essentially kidnap the kids of the people, then that's probably a powerful chip. Basically trying to revive the USSR, without needing to force people to do that. And don't quote me on that. I'm not very up to date on that particular conflict. But in terms of the second case study that Vivian mentions in this article is in Myanmar. And this is where a conflict in this particular country has led to the forced removal of I'm going to try to pronounce this as the Rohingya, right? And this right here is essentially just the Islamist population. A lot of us will be surprised about this particular conflict in terms of the involvement of particularly, like, Buddhists, right? Like, in terms of what's taking place. I remember particularly, like, just like reading about the Myanmar conflict in general and understanding that they're like the Buddhists are actually not all peaceful. It's like, like you expect that. That's the kind of the picture that we've painted of them here in America, at least. But it's just goes to show you how much we really know about a lot of different things. And the last one I'm going to mention here is Gaza, right? And I mentioned this last because it kind of rolls into the lesson here. In terms of the Renaissance, we should really understand something, that Netanyahu, right, which is this is the prime minister or leader of Israel, and he is wanted and has arrest warrants out for him by the International Criminal Court for depriving Gaza people of food delivery and directing attacks towards civilians. Now, despite this particular crime, this guy is given safe passage to the U.S., right, to and from the U.S. And this is really due to the idea that the U.S. doesn't recognize International Criminal Court's authority, right? And this is something like we got a history here in terms of actually like just kind of trampling over the rule of the international rule of law, right? And I think one of the most blatant ways we did that was with our quote-unquote war on terror, right? So we went to the Middle East and we did we kind of we caused havoc there in a lot of different cases, but we also like made people mad in Europe actually, and of course when we talk about like things like international law, we're talking about like countries in Europe that also want a stake in that. And what's happening now in terms of the international law, it's important that we understand we helped create these courts. We took part in the creation of these courts, but we were never members ourselves, right? I mean, it sounds like a pretty clear case of rules for thee but not rules for me type thing. And we should really understand something. The idea of having teeth behind international law, I think a lot of us, if we were informed about what happened, we would understand why this needs to be respected in terms of, in the very, at the very least, we can't have essentially someone just blatantly ignoring this idea of starving, the accusations of starving citizens and targeting civilians, right? And that's on, whether you're like one of the, the brainwashed loud few that are saying like, oh, this is, he's actually not a criminal, or one of the people who are actually saying like, yeah, this definitely needs to be paid attention to. This is something that we really like, that needs to be addressed in terms of we can't simply just allow a large population of people to simply, be under this idea that this guy's a criminal and not be settled out. Because there has been no formal statements to address a lot of these things in terms of the accusations, right? And we need to understand that our government and the population, the citizens, we've grown very far apart from each other in terms of the principles that we expect to govern our actions. And this is something that has to change. And this idea of corruption, it's not exclusive to the U.S. I've recently seen a UN whistleblower account where this woman discusses some very, just very troublesome behavior, I'll say, and just a very toxic culture in general. And I think one thing that I was really under the illusion of is that the UN were essentially the good guys. And it doesn't look like that's going to necessarily be the case. Like, we can just, there's some kind of moral authority that we can kind of hope and rely on with a lot of things. I think when it comes down to this idea of moving into the future, we have to start to build that and mold that for ourselves. And that's going to become less of something that we simply rely on other people for. We're going to have to actively take part in that and actively keep people accountable, right? Because if you survey the citizens in America, no one thinks that Edward Snowden should be treated as a criminal and exiled, but that's how things are, right? The idea is that, the military is putting themselves in the authority to rule over who is a criminal and who is not a criminal, or the courts in this particular situation. And that is outright wrong, right? Because in terms of like Edward Snowden, yeah, but also like Julian Assange as well. The idea of Julian Assange, he's the founder of WikiLeaks, and he got in trouble for publishing WikiLeaks. He got in trouble for publishing a whistleblower's information, and that is interesting because there's a case back in the 70s during the Pentagon, or during the Vietnam War, where a guy named Daniel Ellsberg released the Pentagon Papers, and Daniel Ellsberg was a whistleblower, so he violated a quote-unquote law by doing this, right? Julian Assange, he published. There's a difference. He did not work for our government. He took papers that were given to him from a whistleblower. And that right there, that's a very stark contrast, right? When you think about what's happened in the past versus what's happening today. And we have to start to realize that these guys are getting like way out of control. Like, this is, it's not something that you can simply just stand back and ignore. We're essentially acting as if we're yelling that we're really a nation of free people, and we just look like psych patients to the rest of the world, right? Because it very much looks like we're being held hostage by our Pentagon and our courts. And we can't continue to act that way, right? Because they've grown fat off of the public donation and goodwill. And we'll talk plenty about what the government does, I'm sure. But understand that this is something that we can't rely on to fix itself. We can't just simply say, oh, okay, well, these things just happen. We enabled this monster, and we have to do something about it. There's a true power in the advertisement of America, and I, despite us falling short, I want us to really understand and recognize the power in having a high ideal. And that real power needs to really be taken advantage of, in the fact of actually trying to live up to that ideal, and not simply allowing it to be something that we hang on our front door while we allow for everything else to take place. We have to really do something. And when it comes down to the idea of the UN not being that moral authority that I particularly was fooled about, we have to realize that we have to create that, and we may be in a good position to do that, because when it comes down to the U.S., you would think that we'd be on the front lines in terms of UN and International Criminal Court and things of that nature. And I think we really could. There's a tremendous potential in actually turning this what's happening in the world and what's taking place, and actually having an international criminal court that has real teeth and real bearing, not just in a tool for power, but an actual real a place that has morality and principles to be listened to. This next report is on mega-polluters, right? And specifically how mega-polluters are mega-polluters are getting access to that, just that sweet green energy money that we invest so much into, and these companies are getting this in a lot of cases, despite actually generating more pollution in many cases. And I mean, this is huge. I think this is huge, but it's huge, and it involves a lot of different components, right? The article itself, it talks about pollution, but it really focuses on really specifically the problems of people reporting, or indie journalists reporting on what's happening in terms of mega polluters, like this particular situation, getting access to money for green energy, quote unquote. This is the author is Sasha Shavkin, or I think I'm saying that right. And Sasha is a man. So Sasha talks about how really they investigated and found workarounds, particularly with getting access to data that was paywalled. And I'm not talking about let me borrow your Netflix, I'm talking about paywalled as in I can't afford this. There's no way I can afford this. And that seems to be a tremendous essentially defense for a lot of these guys, is the paywall things, to where only the people with money can get access to this. And if you have a lot of money, then chances are these are one of your friends you're trying to snitch on, it's so problematic, but there are some good guys out there that were able to help him out with a few things in terms of some media agencies and stuff like that. I'm not sure how much he told them or how he did it, but so I really don't know if they're good guys. But a lot of us should understand that this problem, I think, is really speaking to something really revolving around the idea of banking, right? Because we've been losing a lot of community banks. And for those that don't know, community banks are much more likely to be guided by a sense of principles and morals and duty to really help communities. Large banks, I mean, they are the ones who are funding wars. They're the ones who fund just mega polluters in general, which isn't really a surprise, but they fund a lot of the world's problems, right? And the idea of big banks giving loans, to problematic companies, these are I want you to picture going into one of these banks and trying to get a business loan. They have to do a very thorough evaluation, as you would rightfully assume, right? And with these particular banks, when it comes down to doing business with a lot of these mega polluters, I mean, a lot of the times, these aren't mega polluters to them. That's just, Jim who works for Exxon or something like that. These aren't, these are the people who come in, and if you tell them no, then maybe they'll go somewhere else. I don't know what's the driving factor there, honestly, but when it comes down to big banks, they don't like, they're not thinking about the future, humanity, like, trying to do good. They're really thinking about how to make money, right? Like, and this is really more so the managerial, right? Because there could be smaller people in those, or people within those institutions that do good, which is, I mean, this is the same case for government, I suppose. But the idea is, these people, a lot of them, they're not going to be moved by the fact that these guys don't really do green, and or really carry out the green initiative in terms of its actual cause. And we have to understand that. And like I said, these guys are financing a lot of the things that plague this world, right? That really, really, when we think about a sick society, the disappearance of community banks, I think, is really speaking to, is really a symptom of this larger problem, right? Which, on the flip side, which is also the idea of these bigger banks becoming more central, it's also a symptom, and we have to really carry that out and understand that. And this particular report, I would say, reminds me of what I think is quickly, or who I think has quickly become our favorite dirtbag, and this is Elon and Tesla, right? And for those that don't know, Elon only survived by being government funded, right? Like, or Tesla, right? And Tesla under Elon, that survived by being government funded. And I think this may surprise some of you that are, like, not really informed about his ventures, and especially given his new focus on really cutting off and stopping governments from our government from funding initiatives. And I'm not gonna rail too hard here on this particular point. I'll link a video for those who want to know more about our genius billionaire friend. But the idea here is that the Department of Energy, they gave this guy money to essentially promote more sustainable energy initiatives, and Elon, he was essentially just making some outrageous claims, as he does, and essentially claiming that the battery charger stations for Tesla were going to be quote unquote zombie apocalypse proof, or be operable independent of the actual grid, and this was going to be due to, like, sustainable energy. And this is interesting, like, this idea of, like, calling it, I think he actually, I'm not sure if he used those specific words, but it was like apocalypse something, I forget what. But and I want to call him a geek, but I really don't want to give people, like, the impression that I think he's really a smart or a competent person. And when he didn't invent the company or the battery system for Tesla that really made electrical cars possible. In actuality, in terms of with this particular zombie apocalypse proof charging station, Tesla depends on the energy from coal and gas to recharge their cars, right? This was just never mentioned again. At some point he just stopped talking about the charging stations being zombie apocalypse proof. And this is really just, I mean, in addition to him just being a blatant liar, like on this particular, or blatant just ignoring it. I'm not going to call him a liar, because maybe he'll come out with another 50 years, who knows. But the idea here is that this guy, he actually, like, being government funded, he paid off the Department of Energy loan before, I would say, I mean, some very shady magical quarter of sales, and I'm not sure what happened or what took place, but the stock shot up after this month, and I mean, he's been on a roll since, and paying off that loan made sure that the taxpayers and the government, they never got a return from funding this clown. And that's something that we really gotta understand. Like, these mega polluters, these people, like, operating under the guise of green energy, they're just finding different ways to get government money. That's what a lot of these large companies essentially do. Like, we're actually, like, our large corporations are actually, like, very firmly, like, supported by our tax dollars. They're not like, a lot of these guys, they're not like, oh my god, they're just, you know, bastions of innovation and, you know, just providing the best for people. They're just really good at being vampires. Like, we need to understand that. That's what a lot of these companies come down to. And in terms of this article, like, one thing I really thought was interesting was Sasha also mentioned finding a creative way to present this particular report. And he wanted to make sure that people really, just more, I would say a larger variety of people, really digested this investigation and what was taking place. And in terms of this renaissance, I think this should be prioritized much more than what it is, because we have books with so much information, right? This world would look completely different if just people were just reading all the time, right? But that's not the case, right? And that's this idea of digesting the information that's out there now, I think, would transform us in considerable ways. But we should think about how to make that really a reality, in terms of really translate this information that's even now available. And not necessarily, I think finding new information should be more important than what it is now, but also the idea of digesting our, you know, and really learning from, you know, what is there is going to be really just as important, and I would say even more. The idea of this idea of really how to do this, I think we need to understand something, like, about, I would say, if you think about the movies, right, that are really in the future, right, these kids who may be like grade school age, they have knowledge that is equal to doctorate level, right? And we're going to have to make strides in order to make that happen. That's not going to be necessarily dependent on how much information is available. We're not responding to the information that is available now. We need to realize that you know, where we get bang for buck, right? And I think where we get a lot of bang for buck is mixing the idea of really education with creativity. And that's where we're going to get most of our bang for buck, I would say. I don't think we can ignore what we're doing in terms of the, I would say, maybe the cultural problem of really just how we prioritize what's happening in society and who we're valuing in society. I think that's definitely something that I think even more so we need to focus on, this idea of what we're doing to make more percentages of the population essentially react to the information that is out there now and the new information that they do get. I would say I'm pretty passionate about this particular idea because I'm really interested in really developing like different forms of art, stories, movies, games, and various forms of media to help present more information to people. And I really do believe that this is a worthwhile cause. And in order to move towards that future, right, we do have more people learning things more easily. We have to get this right. We can't allow for things to be as they are now, because passive, if we remain passive, then in this particular case, the large banks continue to do what they do, right? You have Mega-Polluters getting green energy money. And a lot of us have grown really passive about understanding that, right? That understanding, because it's just like, yeah, of course, I mean, yeah, we like, it's a corrupt system, and we can't just have that understanding and hold that understanding without doing anything, right? And just wait for our savior. There is no savior coming. There is no one person coming, the savior coming, and we need to really keep that understanding in terms of we are the people. We are the people that are coming, that are here for the future generations. This next report is on really cyber surveillance and counter surveillance in general, and there's an investigative team that's on the front lines with investigating cybercrime, and there's this book called Chasing Shadows. Apparently, I haven't read it yet. I mean, honestly, it might make it on my rating list, because this article might have just been a good PR for him, but I mean, it seemed pretty interesting. But the idea here is that governments are essentially, they're working with private firms that are really just frequently hiring ex-intelligence operatives to surveil people, right? And these firms, these private firms, they're also working. They're getting on their capitalism game, right? They're trying to essentially advertise themselves as people who can surveil like your spouse, or the neighbor that you don't like. And this is getting problematic. This is getting very problematic. I don't think people understand. This article talks about how like organizations, particularly ones investigating like humanitarian crimes, are often the targets of surveillance, right? And for those that don't know, Edward Snowden was warning us back in the day, particularly about things about really how clicking on a link could lead to like cookies, which are essentially just ways to track you and allow for spying, right? There was even a situation where someone was literally monitoring screen activity like directly. Like he remembered looking over the shoulder and seeing someone monitor screen activity, and that's troublesome. But that was a long thing. If you think about Edward Snowden, that was a long time ago. And this idea of like also giving up, like when you give up your phone to people, right? And you like someone, like you have to go to some place and they have to collect your phone. You should understand also that could lead to essentially just ways for malware to be installed on your particular phone, right? There was one instance in the article that mentioned how the wife of a man who was assassinated, assassinated. That wife had malware installed on her phone just a few months before the. I mean, this was like, I think this was an official government sanctioned assassination. I don't know what the particular details around that are, but we should understand that was how that happened. You know, how that took place. The intel, how they got that intel, and very likely linked to the, you know, the wife actually having, you know, her phone taken for a second and thinking nothing about it. And I mean, today things like no-click hacking is really becoming a new threat, but it's still reported to be more expensive than other previous ways. So, I mean, unless you get on on the bad side of some pretty rich people, then that's not gonna be a problem. And I feel like this needs to be mentioned, just because the idea of cyber surveillance is a growing threat. We need to understand something, that Israel in particular is very interested in spying on Americans, right? And they have a surveillance system that rivals the NSA. In Gaza, they're actually they were reportedly targeting journalists, right? At some point, it was like Gaza was the most dangerous place for a journalist to be. And this idea of Israel and how it represses Palestinians, or how they repress Palestinians, this has been described in terms of in the form of really just a testing ground for the U.S. And it's this problem going on, you know, passing this problem on to the next generation gets scales harder for them to handle than we have now, right? And that's a huge part, right, of what's happening today. It won't. There's nobody saying it's going to be easy, but it does get harder the more you pass it on to the next generation. It's not going to be something that is something that they can just, they just came together and finally realized. Yeah. Probably not. Probably like a lot of times it's probably not gonna happen like that. Like, we don't even. There's so many cases that we get this idea that life is like a movie. In a lot of cases, we don't even hear about a lot of the whistleblowers. We don't. Like, they there's essentially like whistleblower anonymous groups, basically, like kind of like Alcoholics Anonymous, but whistleblower anonymous, where people describe what it's like to whistleblow, and it is not all glory, right? People don't hear things and react, right? And the people who would be moral to principled actors in the government, they're looking at the way the population just outright refuses to do anything about corruption, and they're thinking to themselves like, man, I can't do anything. I can't. I mean, because if I go to the public, there's nothing going to be done. Nothing's going to be done. It's just going to be, I'm just going to be one of those people at the whistleblower anonymous meetings that, that nothing happens for. And this idea of counter surveillance is counter surveillance now. It's counter surveillance now, but it really should just be just the way life is, honestly. But this idea of these companies. These companies are so predatory, right? And you should think about particularly the trap of convenience, right? I remember going into Whole Foods. If you guys have been in Whole Foods lately, this is around what two. I'm doing this in the about to start July of 2025. But right now we got this thing where essentially like Whole Foods has a palm scanner or something like that, and I was just like, that is it. Like I remember seeing it and just thinking like I actually told the attendant who was watching, I was like, yo, that's creepy. But at some point, like before I think I had talked to the attendant, I talked to somebody, a cashier, like, hey, what do you think? Are these like? So you just hold your palm up, like, and I was gonna like start ragdoll, basically just ragdoll talking all types of trash about it, but the person, they said, yeah, they were excited. The cashier was excited, and it was just like, it was such a moment. It was like, wow, you are sold on this idea. It's just like, yeah, you don't even have to have your wallet. Like, you can, I was like, yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right. You don't even have to have your wallet. But in terms of that idea, I think the convenience that's coming up now, it's more of a trap. And we have to think about it like that and have to be more offensive or defensive about this understanding that we're really taking on now, because these guys are very hungry. In terms of just some ideas, you can also you can download something called LibreWolf as a web browser. And LibreWolf, it's gonna be inconvenient for people who are used to regular browsers, because they don't save all your logins and passwords. You have to, every time you start it, it's kind of a new thing. And that right there is kind of the cost, right? You get more security that way. Also look into particularly the idea of de-googling your phone. That's something that you can kind of look into in terms of what's out there now, particularly if you have, ironically enough, the what is it called, the one of the Google phones. You can de-Google your phone, which is crazy, but that's apparently really a good way to do it. But the idea is that Google's censoring itself in people's lives, and that is not that I don't think we can necessarily see that immediate cost in terms of what's happening there, and what that could lead to, and we should be more aware of it. And also the idea of in terms of cost, this idea of new phones that are just all basically just artificial intelligence phones. They're going to have all types of security vulnerabilities, and they're really going to usher in a whole new series of possibilities for firms and governments to spy on us. AI, it's the way we talk about it is so crazy, because it's just, when you think about like artificial intelligence, it's a name given to essentially just make something more sexy, right? Like to basically just sell something. In terms of artificial intelligence, computers that think, yeah, we have that. What they're doing with that, right? What makes it artificial intelligence is how much is really going into the idea of what they're thinking about, and what's really being naturally inputted into the system. And we have to really understand that. In terms of this renaissance, I really want us to particularly think about how we can repair our relationship with technology, right? We need we need a transformation to occur that allows for this next generation to grow up with a much more developed understanding of this world of signals and waves and data. And we have, I mean, right now, if we allow things to kind of go the way they are going, we have politicians that are being paid by big tech to keep their mouths shut about what big tech is doing. And this new level of education, of really just, it basically the next generation actually understanding and having full knowledge of what's taking place with data and technology, and how they interact with this world. This isn't something that we're going to get by being passive about what's taking place today. Now our next report is on Boeing. I guess our favorite civilian aviation titan and our favorite major defense contractor, right? And this company, they apparently had another accident, right? So I'm going to link an article about, open secrets. An open secrets article where by Dave Leventhal, and these guys, they apparently had this accident in India where all but one passenger was killed. And if you are maybe wondering why a company littered in scandals is still a civilian aviation titan and a major defense contractor, shut up. And if you insist on talking about this any further, I want you to look out of whatever window that you have towards the closest parking lot. There should be a man in a trench coat waiting and looking directly at you. And this guy, he may look a little bit scary, but he's actually friendly, and he is actually more than willing to provide a listening ear to your complaints. Now, in terms of this report, it actually focuses on Boeing and how Boeing is cleaning up its act. And apparently, they're giving money to politicians. And if you are wondering how that would necessarily help, I'm going to refer you one more time to the gentleman in the parking lot. Anyway, they're actually doing more than bribing, or rather being generous to our political representatives that happen to hold influence over how they're regulated, right? They're actually they're improving their employee base, and they want to improve their safety standards to become a gold standard for the American hitman, for the American manufacturer. If you meatbags would stop asking so many questions, you'd understand that Boeing has been one of the most generous companies to our honest and principled politicians. They've been one of the most active donors since 2008, actually. And they're growing ever close to our politicians in Washington. And this is becoming so significant, in fact, that their new headquarters is in Arlington, which is right outside of Washington. And this way, right, with this new headquarters that they're building in Arlington, they won't even have to risk getting on a plane to Washington. They're going to be able to more frequently visit our politicians, and like many of the other major defense contractors, they'll be right in the area whenever our politicians need, whatever they might need. For this renaissance, I want you guys to really do the best you can to imagine that really this culture of being financially generous to political committees and campaigns may actually harm the general populace, right? And this is this idea of Boeing. This is how civilians are becoming aware of the problems that are likely manifesting in really the big five defense contractors, right? Because these guys, they get taxpayer money without really having to uphold standards or compete with other people. Now, with this report, I'm going to try to not get thrown off YouTube, I suppose. And apparently, foreign aid just stopped giving about $54 billion, right? And I know that many of us are thinking about those poor Africans, and not the ones in the Congo or Sudan. I'm talking about the indigenous white South Africans who are currently going through the most monstrous genocide. I think it's really disgusting that these people are being forced to give those darkies back those animals back their land. But this report actually focuses on the aid that goes out to really the less needy populations in third world countries, right? And this report talks about how governments all over the world, they may be following Elon's clown show and cutting back aid. It also reports on how more money is actually a direct cause to more efficient giving in a lot of these particular situations, right? So, for instance, like 1,000 trucks can deliver enough food for 2 years to a population, and that would be for one price, but the efficiency gets just cut up tremendously when you think about the logistical nightmare involved in delivering one truck to give aid for 2 months or something. And for anyone wondering why some country in Africa is our problem and why we provide aid to them, you should really understand that without the IMF and the World Bank, these countries wouldn't destroy their land to provide crops to corporations, or just provide natural resources, I'll say, to corporations that sell to first world countries, right? Africa would be able to produce enough food to feed itself without the influence of private militaries that are led by corporations to force them to really provide certain resources to first world countries. So we really need to come to an understanding that America and first world countries were actually welfare states, right? And it's been like this for a very long time. Elon is, put this nicely, he's an idiot and a fraud, right? And that's he's doing what he's doing because he needs to draw attention away from really the idea of him and his friends being the primary benefactors for, in terms of government money, right? And being the primary sources of really the destruction that takes place across the rest of the world. And for this renaissance, I think we should really pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and stop looking for handouts and figure out just how to get off welfare, right? Because preferably we can work out a relationship with the countries that we're destroying to help each other out. And I'm sure that we really can come to this understanding if we just stop being a bunch of lazy victims. Now, this next report it's interesting because it brings to light so much about really, I would say, the most misunderstood and unfortunate among us, right? Because I'm really hoping that we can really become more compassionate, right? And this populace, particularly, are revolving around the also poor rich people that we really haven't taken the time to really understand, right? Chris Hedges has done a collaboration with Rob Larson to shed light on this highly neglected section of the populace. And we don't really know how tough it is to be rich, right? A lot of us, you know, we see these guys buying up, entire islands, and we think, wow, it must be nice to have enough money to buy an entire floating landmass. But we really don't think, right? We don't think about what made them buy that island, right? So many of these people, they can't even look us in the eyes. Of course, they would need an island, right? And we're selfish to a point that it's really disgusting. I think I don't think we really think, like, for instance, do you know how hard it is for these guys to dress up like normal people every day? Right? According to this report by Chris Hedges and Rob, they get a small outlet by wearing an expensive watch, but I'm sure it is so difficult for people like Mark Zuckerberg or Elon to wear normal t-shirts or pants like the rest of us. We don't even understand how many of these people have to worry about making up their hair after riding home from work on a private helicopter. And there's a lot of people out there that talk about how out of touch these guys are, but do you think about how hard it is to fire everyone who dares to question you or your decisions? And just because all the servant schools do the best they can to make sure that us brokies know our place, that doesn't mean that we get it right all of the time, right? Imagine just wanting to feed your poodle a braised steak like you do every night, and the butler has the nerve to look at you questioningly, or God forbid, complain about how he can't afford the meals that we give to rebels. Of course you have to fire him. Every time you interact with these peasants, the working class, it's because they're getting paid by you. So they should definitely know their place, right? You couldn't even a lot of us can't even fathom at being paranoid at all the friends around us, just because they're probably hoping that we give them some amount of money, right? People always talk about things like income inequality, but the bottom 50% of all households, I bet you didn't even know this. They hold an entire 1.5% of all of the wealth. An entire 1.5%. And I'm telling you, that's more than enough to eat cake every now and then. And the bottom half, they may have like this little bit of debt, but no one talks about how the rich have to maintain multiple homes at the same time. They have, family jewels that include really passports, and these these God given countries, they are actually being so considerate to give the wealthy priority over the rest of us, right? Because they need a break. And I know we need to be blessed to have these people ruling our economy, but in this renaissance, I really want us to focus on how to relieve these people from their significant burden. This is really a YouTube video and a certain report, particularly on the channel Moconomy. And this particular video is called "A New Economy Inside the Revolution You're Not Hearing About." And in this video, they go over a few different situations, right? And situations that I think really shed some very important light on how we maybe could take things forward in this renaissance, and also just affirm the idea that has been really brewing in terms of with my particular project of the Foundry in general, right? They go over like particularly a few things, right? So one's a co-living hotel. Another one would be a situation of urban agriculture where they provide employment for various types of people. And one is a brewing co-op, and another is a community market that is kind of like a garage, it's kind of like a large garage sale where a lot of immigrants come together like outside of this one particular apartment building, and it's kind of, they call it like the backyard space. It's cool. I like it. But I'm very much interested in a lot of these different new waves of life. Co-living, urban agriculture, worker co-ops, and also really just the idea of community market spaces. And there's another one that I forgot to mention earlier. It's a open source workshop. In terms of co-living, it's firmly established in the Foundry, right? So I'll have some links in the description below. But the idea of urban agriculture, it's not something that I've really chose to expand on in that ebook version of really the Foundry right now. But the idea is, it's speaking to a system that I've really been thinking about a lot, right? Because this idea of urban agriculture, I think it links to a situation where I would say a friend of mine and was able to essentially get a state to recognize food grown from from various homes and neighborhoods, as really essentially sourced from a farm, right, or an official farm. And that way that these particular places could stock grocery stores, right? And I think there's an important idea in this, in that when you have really just people, so let's say for instance the Foundry in general, right? So allowing for this network to exist and creating and facilitating this network could come into a few ways. I'm not going to spend too much time on how it could come in, but this idea is something that could easily be coupled with essentially things like think about a landscape company that is that is regenerative in nature, right? And they help service these particular plants or these particular, gardens or farms or whatever, and they work with the actual homeowner to essentially provide local food to different grocery stores or whatever. And that's becoming more and more important the more and more we realize that we're like depending on things like pesticides to, a very toxic degree. And for those that don't know, our politicians abroad, they're basically like salespeople for Monsanto and, defense contractors basically. But also just the idea of Monsanto being on that list is crazy, because there's a point in I think it was like some kind of WikiLeaks book where they were talking about how like this idea of Monsanto being able to provide fertilizer was essentially sold as the countries being more advanced or something. Like it was, or more like technologically advanced. The way they sold that, I was like, I looked at everybody, or I looked around. I don't remember where I was, but I was just looking around like, are you, like, we can't be living here. We can't be living here right now. but we really, but we really are. That's pretty crazy. But we gotta start thinking about things like what farming really looks like. I mean, I don't even know how you sell, like, how do you come out of your mouth and say that this is technological advancement, in terms of like, oh, this idea GMO food is actually technologically advanced food. I'm like, wow, this is interesting. Let's not mention like the health risk of any of this stuff, I suppose. Like, what the, it's crazy. But that's, I mean, it's life. It is life. It is life right now. And in terms of this idea in general, like regenerative farming, I think is going to become more and more prevalent, especially with the deregulation going on with like a lot of these guys. But the linking. I'm going to link this in the description in terms of a Substack where I tease everyone with the paywall, like, for the Foundry Research and Development series. And that's where, essentially, I'm going to post, like, more about different things. But my first article should be up by the time you see this, and it's going to be about really mesh networks or local internet in terms of how the Foundry could potentially come with local internet or local internet systems and promote local networks. Now, with this video, I started to really think about specifically exploring brewing as a co-owned business, right? Because they had this co-owned brewery that was really cool, and I was thinking, particularly when it comes down to the idea of the Foundry, thinking specifically about like tribe or guild owned businesses of all kinds, but specifically like coffee shops and bookstores. But the night atmosphere has kind of been gnawing away at my subconscious, right? Because I really want it to be something that is this is I feel like this may be a bit like ego driven, I suppose, in terms of how I'm looking at it. But I really want this to be like, when it comes down to a foundry, I want the nightlife to be really unparalleled, right? In terms of what you can do at night, how it feels to walk around at night, and that is really something that I'm going to continue to try to do. And I think the idea of, particularly in this case, a co-owned brewery company is something that could definitely facilitate that in a few ways. But of course, it has to be there has to be a balance in terms of the sober nightlife stuff in general too. So we'll have to think about that. But in general, that's definitely something that really I like to really pair in my head with nightlife. And this this idea of really a community marketplace in general, this idea of a community marketplace, it's something that I think is important and has very much it's important in itself. But I would say that I picture this more as a stepping stone to the foundry, because I think that people should be going outside and interacting as kind of a normal everyday thing, right? I don't think it's necessarily going to be a driving factor that these people are going to be like kind of like economically incentivized to come out. It's more like these people just come out just to have regular fun or interactions with the groups that they're a part of or whatever. But also the idea of it being a stepping stone is really due to the idea of a, what is it called, there is a, I forget the actual name of it. I call it the recycle, and I think I got that name from I think it was, I want to say it was somewhere in Germany, where they were taking essentially just recycle goods and making it something. But I want it to be something to where people are able to essentially have stores there, or have stores of things there, and essentially have their things stored there, and people can essentially just come and shop there. But the money doesn't, Goodwill's apparently really predatory, and don't quote me on this, I haven't looked this up too well, but the idea is that they could be getting these donations and being actually very surprisingly profitable with the idea of them getting donations with different people and being a source of donations. But I want this place in particular to be something that works with the people, so the amount of money that they get is the people get and there's an understood between the percentage that these people in these buildings will be able to get versus on the actual products that they have in that place. So essentially, this place would be just essentially a middleman for the local populace in a lot of cases. The last thing, the last piece, I think, was the open source lab, right? And in terms of open source, I don't think a lot of people realize how just tech really got started, right? Because it has its roots in open source, right? It was just how things were. And for those interested, there's a book called The Friendly Orange Glow. Yeah, I should totally look that up. But it's really about the origination of this system called Plato, right? And Plato originated in essentially the education field. The idea was psychologists came, to the conclusion that maybe there was a better way to do this education thing. And it got into colleges. And, there was a understanding that, or a culture of college students coming in and grad students coming in to help essentially create applications for the system. It grew tremendously. I couldn't, like, if you, it probably, like, it probably felt like walking into a time machine. Like, if you were able to walk into one of these Play-Doh labs and see what was going on, because they had, like, it was, I mean, when you talk about things like online gaming, when you talk about things like chat rooms, when you talk about things like online newsletters, these were propagating through this lab before, the rest of the big tech companies got involved, like IBM, Microsoft. All of those people got really involved, and Apple got really involved. And the system was so amazing, that essentially, like, businesses found out and they came in, and there was this tremendous profit incentive, and colleges and even some professors decided to essentially just, but they basically gave the kids who really helped develop a lot of the applications on the system, they would give them like little, like very small, measly percentages of the actual patents and the profits that came from the patents on these systems. And many times, like, these colleges were even like holding diplomas, basically holding the diplomas hostage. And it just got complete, like, when the whole patent system started in terms of with Plato, a lot of the collaborations slowed tremendously, and it just destroyed itself, right? So you didn't even hear about the company that really essentially destroyed Plato, right? Because it was just, they were so greedy about everything that it just became like it wasn't even something that they could capitalize on. It was really bad in terms of when you think about how a lot of these companies got, and how the culture really, changed due to a lot of these corporations coming in. But I think we need to think about and reevaluate the understanding that we have about open source, because Plato, I think, was a blow to the open source world that, people that we never recovered from, right? And that right there is something that I really, really would like for the Foundry to represent and really come to repair and even carry on this legacy of open source products. This idea of essentially, like, you have companies that are creating cultures around trying to basically make a patent, then yank the patent, so where they'll be the ones to profit from it. But if you establish a culture that really prioritizes, like, innovation, then I think you'll consistently be a step ahead of anybody with the culture of simply patent something and take it off the market. And this idea of people transforming, in terms of in this renaissance, they will come to you just based off the culture alone. They'll want to come to you and they'll want to prioritize you. But the idea of the innovation that you provide, I think that is going to lend to another layer of essentially dirt being laid over the corporations and the culture that they try to create, to where we have this and we profit off of it. Even though the main people who profit are the people who wear business suits, and not the people who actually do, like, actual, like, work on the actual product themselves. It is so ridiculous in terms of how people are currently getting away with things. But we do need to think about how our society needs to look in terms of this whole video, right? going back to the idea of the new economy, in the many instances where people are starting to really pioneer new ways of living. I'm particularly invested in, using, really, I guess, the Foundry as the container, but the main thing is that these ideas are start to come out and propagate and start to take form more and more and more. So the idea of the Foundry is built on a system of really not yielding to essentially being, the demands of other people, right? So in terms of actually being more diplomatic in a lot of situations, I think there's a lot less room with the Foundry, but I want, people to and I want people to understand that. I think personally that those give and takes that we kind of do as we bring new ideas to the forefront, they allow for a lot of parasitic pieces of our society to persist. And the Foundry is meant to essentially be a representation that corruption and a lot of these in the sick society that we live in is coming to an end. So there is going to be a lot less room to move, but I want you guys to all take really note about what you can do, even if there is a particular give and take with your particular situation. Regardless, I think moving forward is that there is value in the diplomacy, right? So there's there's a guy right now proliferating the space in terms of like with more like liberal left leaning media, right? And he's like what I for I'm not even gonna mention his name, but the idea is this guy is like known as kind of like the apologist for the left wing, right? And the idea is he's more like, oh yeah, like MAGA has a whole bunch of good points and stuff like that, and he's giving he's giving up tremendous ground, I think, to a lot of people, especially in the left wing space. A lot of people see him as kind of a fake lefty or something, basically. But I think there is diplomatic value into what he's doing, right? I am in no way in favor of what he's doing, but I do think there is diplomatic value in that, right? In terms of being able to say, oh, with particularly things like war, like, oh, well, Trump just bombed Iran, we may enter World War III now, and him being able to wake up a larger base of MAGA people than, normal, like, lefties that are always on high alert about, Trump and MAGA and stuff like that, because maybe they'll listen to, or they'll look at us and I said us, I'm not, I'm firmly independent, I suppose, but the idea is they'll look at, like, the left and they'll say, these guys are always up in a roar about, whatever Trump's doing, but this guy, maybe there's something to hear here, and, like I said, I think there's better ways for him to do it, but and I'm not going to endorse it, but I do see the value in terms of having that diplomatic understanding. So I am firmly rigid in a lot of these things, a lot of these concepts that I talk about with the Foundry, and I'm not going to essentially have the name Foundry come with, all these give and takes to where you got like big banks persisting or stuff like that. Yeah, where like more local banks aren't coming up because of the deals we made to finance certain things. I'm not in favor of that. And I mean, if it ever comes to it, just take what's useful and discard where you need to do some give and take, or discard what's not useful in general. That's the end of the sermon, and I think what I want a lot of you guys to really ponder in terms of the end of the segment is the idea of really the basilica. In the old days, that's where they called church. That's what they called churches, right? And in terms of the basilica, I think there was tremendous value in terms of the placement and what happened there, and a lot of things. And just to give you some ideas, like one is the basilica was next to the food market. It was next to the food, so you have a place of prayer around food. I think there was really a coupling there that I could appreciate as someone who is really more akin to the idea of really the benefits that may not be more apparent. But also, I would say in this particular idea, the basilica was often the highest point in a town, right? So let's say you're doing a deal and you're like in the town and you're doing a particular a particular transaction with somebody, but at some point you look up and you see the top of the basilica, that cross looking down on you, and you get an understanding that maybe that particular transaction is going to be more led by principle, based on the fact that you have that understanding of maybe someone's watching this particular situation. Maybe there should be something else that isn't immediately here guiding this particular interaction. In terms of with the Foundry, I would say I would like there to be a Capitol building in the Foundry, right? And the Capitol building, I want to be a very tall place and have particularly a beacon, right? So a beacon that would let people know all types of things. We're not going to get into it, but the idea is that when people in the basilica, with the basilica, people would get up and people would maybe look up and see that idea of, the cross, and it reminds them of really the idea of principled guidance to whatever transaction they may see or they may be a part of at that time. The idea of looking up at the beacon in the Foundry is, I would say, also to where you have an understanding that principles guide this interaction, but maybe due to the guilds and the tribes that you're a part of in that Foundry, you want there to be a certain understanding that you carry on through that transaction. I want you guys to think about how this takes place, and really start to think about really how you can create a system to where people look up and they feel more guided by genuine principles and morals in those everyday decisions. And what does that really look like?